Are we going? Looks like it. Yep.
Is it? All right. Well, welcome back. This is Two Beards and a Bible. I'm John Swano.
I'm Dave Tenney.
And it's good to be with you. Again, as we mention every episode, it's our hope that as you listen to us babble back and forth and talk about the Scriptures, that you find that it is edifying, that you find something that you can take and then continue your own studies and look into the Scriptures, for one thing, to make sure that we're telling you the truth.
Yeah.
Don't take our word for it.
Yeah, or if you disagree with us or have a comment, leave it in the comment section.
Right.
If you're watching us on YouTube.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so where are we?
We're in Matthew chapter 17 and verse 14.
14. All right, so we'll let you go ahead and read then.
I'm going to read until I stop.
Yeah, that's fine.
I don't know what that means. It says, and when they had come to the multitude, a man came to him, kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic. And I wrote this down as a note in my Bible. In the King James, it says he's a lunatic.
That's what it says in the NASB here as well.
You know, lunatics, people used to think, Luna, moon, that it was some kind of moon, something with the moon made people crazy.
Right.
Interesting.
Yeah.
He says he's an epileptic or a lunatic and he suffers severely. For he often falls into the fire and often into the water. So I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him. So let's stop and just talk about that stuff. Because Jesus got a pretty strong statement he says next. So so they just came off the mountain and witnessed Jesus' transfiguration. And they come down here and there's a big pile of people. It says there's a multitude. I guess that's a big crowd. And so this fellow comes down to him and he's kneeling and he asks for mercy. He doesn't, I don't know, what is yours, does yours have anything different than that?
Lord, have mercy on my son.
Yeah. So I would say, hey, can you heal my son? But he just said, maybe he's asking the same thing.
Yeah.
Have mercy on my son. He says, for he's an epileptic, and I guess that's an actual disease we have today. People have seizures.
Right. Well, and a lot of these things, it says here in verse 18, not to skip ahead, but it says that the demon came out of him.
Yeah.
And the boy was cured at once. So maybe at this particular dispensation of time, maybe it was a demon possession that acted such as the common disease that we know today.
Yeah. I think that's...
So, but there's a line. I mean, someone who's epileptic today doesn't have a demon.
Right. Yes.
Because those things were done away with. We're in in this present age, in these last days. Those things no longer have a purpose. At this point in time, they showed the power of Christ and His ability to heal and so on, and that the the demons listened to him. There was no, and that's kind of I'm getting ahead of us here.
But I think the point is that it says an epileptic in the New King James. It says a lunatic here. I think lunatic's probably actually a better translation here.
Yeah, and I can't remember, as you were saying earlier about the having to do with the moon and the phases of the moon. There's a backstory there that I can't remember, so I won't speak on it.
Yeah, me neither.
Right.
I've already said all I know about it.
Right.
Yeah. So he's got this problem, and it's obviously we find out it's some kind of demon possession. And he falls into the fire. That's no good.
Right.
Because you could get burnt. He falls in the water. You could drown. And then he brings him to Jesus' disciples, who were supposed to be able to heal, right? And they couldn't cure him.
Right.
So we're continuing on in verse 17. So Jesus answered and he says, and when I say this, he's talking to his own disciples. He says, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? Bring him here to me. And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the child was cured from that very hour. And then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, Why could we not cast it out? And Jesus said, Because of your unbelief. For surely I say to you, if you have faith as a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, Move from here to there, and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you. However, this kind does not go out except by fasting and prayer. So, I guess the first thing I noticed is, he's pretty hard on his disciples.
Mm-hmm.
That's not something, if I was one of his disciples, I would want to hear.
Right, but think about where they just came from. Think about what they just witnessed.
Yeah.
And yet still, there's that human understanding,
yeah.
and the doubt, and like you mentioned, the story is still unfolding. The account is still unfolding, and so yeah. There's something to be said, though. As we think about these men that were with him, these men that earlier we called them part of Christ's inner circle, kind of. Even at that point, they still had their doubts.
Yeah.
And limitations.
And he says it's because of their unbelief, their lack of faith.
Yeah.
So then he says, if you had faith as a mustard seed, now that cuts right to the core, because a mustard seed's a tiny little thing.
About the smallest thing you can think of.
Yeah.
Outside of microscopic.
Yeah.
Means, yeah.
It's a little bitty tiny seed.
Mm-hmm.
If you had that little bit of faith, you could do anything you wanted. Now he's talking directly to he's not really talking to us. In its context here,
right.
He's talking to the apostles.
Right.
And we have to make that distinction.
Right.
Because I don't care how much faith I have, I'm not moving a mountain.
Right.
Because I don't have any powers from God on this earth.
I've got some heavy stones in the driveway that I'm still building a wall with. And, I still have to pick them up and move them with levers and so on.
Yeah. John, if you had faith, you could build that wall by osmosis. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, see, that just doesn't work. But that's another one of those, a scripture that someone will say, will use, and they'll, I have seen those that claim to be able to heal in this present age use a scripture like that to tell people that they're not healed because they don't have enough faith.
Because it was their faith.
Right.
Yeah. Yep, absolutely. And so that's kind of where he's at now. So he's talking to the apostles, and he says, he goes, this kind does not go out except by prayer and fasting. And I think what he's doing here, at some point Jesus is not going to be with them.
Mm-hmm.
And the apostles still had these powers, this power of healing. We read about that, through the rest of the New Testament. And he's just kind of giving them some, so, you come across this again, this is what it's going to take to do it.
Right.
As President Obama said, it was a teaching moment.
Right, there you go.
There you go. So, okay, we'll go ahead and move on to verse 22. 22 and 23, I'll read those, and then I'll let you read the next section, if that's okay. Last episode, I made John read everything. I didn't read a thing, so. It says, now though they were staying in Galilee, Jesus said to them, the Son of Man is about to be betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him, and the third day he will be raised up. And they were exceedingly sorrowful. So, this is like the second time Jesus has said this to them. Maybe the third time. Yeah, it is the third time.
Right.
Third time that I can recall. He keeps saying this, that he's going to be killed. And, so that's a hard thing for you to stomach from your leader, right?
Right. And maybe they have a idea that it's not going to happen for some time.
Yeah.
Maybe they're thinking, they're obviously, we know that, as we studied before, that they were waiting for an earthly kingdom.
Yeah.
So
he says the Son of Man is about to be betrayed. That sounds like it's not far off to me.
Yeah.
And that's probably why they were sorrowful about it.
Yeah. And one of the 12 was going to do the betraying.
Yeah, absolutely.
And even then, I don't know that don't know that even the one that betrayed him even really had that understanding. That,
yeah.
Yeah, it's those things that as human beings we tend to act rashly, and we don't think things through the consequences of what we're going to do sometimes. And I think that might have been the case here as well.
There's one thing I've learned as I've gotten older is to keep your mouth shut.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just in a meeting at work with some stuff, and I had some contrary opinions to what was being talked about, but I just shut up. And I was thinking, when I was 30, I wouldn't have shut up. I would have said something.
I've probably told you before that in my time running and owning driving schools, that we had to be inspected by the state of Ohio. And most of the time it was a state highway patrolman, but they eventually installed these retired highway patrolmen that were inspectors for the state. And I learned early on that when they came in there, the more I talked, the longer they were there and the more questions they asked. And the more I was quiet, the quicker things went. So I learned to be quiet.
Yes. Just answer the questions.
Right.
Yeah. Some good advice there. John, will you read 26 to the end of the chapter?
26.
24.
So verse 24, chapter 17 of Matthew. And when they had come to Capernaum, those who collected the 2 drachma tax came to Peter and said, "Does your teacher not pay the 2 drachma tax?" And he said, "Yes." And when he came into the house, Jesus spoke to him first, saying, "What do you think, Simon? From whom do the kings of the earth collect customs or poll tax? From their sons or from strangers?" And upon his saying, "From strangers," Jesus said to him, "Consequently, the sons are exempt. But lest we give them offense, go to the sea and throw in a hook, and take the first fish that comes up, and when you open its mouth, you will find a stater. Take that and give it to them for you and me."
This is an interesting thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I did some research on this, and
Good.
I mean, this was a thing that was it goes all the way back to like Exodus, and I didn't write down the scripture, but all male Israelites at that time had to pay a half a shekel to support the temple.
Okay.
And at this time, it's 2 drachmas, which was probably the equivalent to that in this day. And so all male Israelites have to pay this, or are supposed to pay this. So that's what this tax is. It's not like it's not the Roman government. It says those who received the temple tax. And that's what that was for, just to take care of that building.
Yeah.
We still today have church buildings.
Right.
And they need, funds to take care of those things.
Yeah.
So really no different.
Right. And then the interesting thing with the fish.
Oh, that's
pulling the money out of the fish.
Well, so the next part, I think this. So he says, "What do you think, Simon?" So the fellow that came to pay the taxes, Jesus says, "Come in the house." He comes in the house, and there's Jesus, the tax collector, and Peter. And he says, "What do you think, Simon? Who do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes? From their sons or strangers?" So who was Jesus? Jesus's dad, God, was the king of the temple, right? Of the Jewish nation. And Jesus is his son.
Right.
Did Jesus have to pay tax?
Yeah, he was a stranger to them.
Yeah, but in reality,
right.
He says, so he asked Peter, he says, "So who do the kings of the earth take customs or taxes, from their sons or from strangers?" Well, you're not going to tax your family members. It's everybody else that's got to pay.
Right.
So, by rights, Jesus didn't have to pay, because I think that's what he's getting at there.
Right.
He's God's son. He doesn't have to pay the temple tax.
And to drive that point home a little bit more, he's kind of showing there that by bringing that money out of the mouth of a fish at his command, that he's in control of it.
Oh, so, you know, the other thing is he tells Peter to go throw a hook in.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm sure Peter wasn't used to fishing with a hook.
Right.
Because they usually hooked with probably drag lines.
Yeah.
That's how they did it.
Or even, you know, does that mean that he doesn't mention bait?
Yeah.
You know, so how often do you just throw a hook into the water and catch?
Not very often. Not very often.
Yeah.
Not unless you snag something on accident.
Right.
So Peter throws in a hook and he catches this fish,
Mm-hmm.
and there's money in the fish's mouth.
Right.
Now, how did that get there? I think this is when we talk about the providence of God.
Right.
This is an example of that.
Right. He's in control of everything.
Yes.
Yeah. And
Did the fish eat the money and then get on the hook, or did he get on the hook and God put the money in his mouth? We don't know.
it's God's end of the stick.
Yeah.
Right.
You whittle on your own end.
Right.
We don't know. But here's what we do know. Jesus knew that if he threw the hook in there, he was going to catch a fish with money in its mouth.
Right. It wasn't even go fishing for the day, and you'll find eventually, you know, it was the first one.
Yeah,
You pull the first one out, it's going to have that in there.
Yeah. So he says, and when you have opened its mouth, you will find a piece of money. He says, take that and give it to them for me and you. And the reason he did that is at the beginning of 27, he says, never. He says, Jesus said to him, then the sons are free. So he doesn't owe the tax. Mm-hmm. He says, nevertheless, lest we offend them, we'll do this thing.
Right.
And this, I'm not sure where to go with this, but so Jesus isn't obligated to do this.
Right.
But he does it so he doesn't offend people.
Yeah.
Is there a lesson for us today in that?
Yeah, when we think of, you know, considering others more important than ourselves, and you know, there's an application here, I think, for, you know, when we pay taxes today, we complain and grumble about, you know, we pay our taxes and why isn't my road paved, or
Yeah.
you know, every time I drive through my hometown and see how bad the roads have gotten, I'm thinking, well, what are you spending the money on?
Yeah.
You know, but. You know, it is, we know that the governing powers are there for a reason. You know, they're instituted by God. You know, in thinking of Israel, you know, when they clamored for a king, God told them, you don't really want this, but nonetheless, he instituted them for them, and thus today we have the powers that be. And they tell us to, you know, it's their face that's on the money,
Yeah.
as Jesus said. So go ahead and give it to them, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, and you could really go down some rabbit holes with that line of thinking.
Right.
You know, that, you know, about maybe doing. I always think about, you know, so as this is airing, Christmas is coming up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I do not believe in celebrating Christmas as a religious holiday.
Right.
And I don't believe you do either.
Right.
But
Right.
But when somebody wants to talk about Jesus at Christmas time, I'm not gonna jump down their throat about it and say, you know, this was made up by the Romans.
Right. Right.
No.
Well, you know, we're just at the time of this recording, we're just a few days removed from Halloween. And I don't particularly these days have any room in my life for such celebrations. I just don't.
Yeah.
It's a personal conviction of mine. I just am not dressing up for Halloween anymore. I used to enjoy it quite a bit when I was a child. But it's just not something that I'm interested in. But the other day, Sunday, as we were leaving for evening services, I had to dodge a bunch of trick-or-treaters. You know, but I didn't roll down the window and scream.
Yeah.
You know, what are you doing, you heathens? You know, but it's again, you know, we do need to think of others' feelings, and the truth does need to be told, though. At the same time, when we talk about not wanting to offend, there comes a point to where the truth still has to be told.
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking of Halloween.
Yeah.
I'm not condemning anybody for dressing up for Halloween.
I don't dress up, but I did walk with the kids and get candy.
There you go. Yeah. Do you know there's a dentist around here in the area that'll pay you by the pound for that candy?
Oh, really?
The kids never let me do that when they've done that in the past.
That dirty rat.
But I tried.
Yes. Especially when those orthodontist bills start stacking up, right?
Yeah.
You're no stranger to that.
Mm-hmm.
Neither am I. But yeah, it's we got to be careful. It's hard to bring anybody away around to your side of thinking if you're constantly offensive.
I'm screaming at
And
them.
and we do have to respect other people.
Right.
And their beliefs and their opinions. We can disagree with them, but I think there's a way to do it and a way not to do it, for sure.
Yeah, and each, as we think of, if you're watching this and perhaps, you're a Christian and you're thinking of how to evangelize your friends and family, it's knowing your audience as well.
Yeah.
Because I can tell you that the preacher that baptized my wife and I minced no words, but it's exactly what I needed at that point.
Yeah.
But that same approach might run someone else off.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
you got to know your audience for sure.
Yeah.
And I think the reason Jesus paid this tax was because he didn't want to. If he would have said no, I'm not paying it, he would have driven away some of these Jews from listening to anything he had to say.
Right.
So I think that's the lesson in there.
And not to mention any of in his perfect ability to see and know what was going to happen in the future, what there would have hindered the job that he had to do.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. So that is the end of chapter 17. I believe we are at 22 minutes. We should probably talk a little bit further so we can maybe get into chapter 18.
Okay.
And maybe we'll get through the first 5 verses. So here Jesus talks about, and this is going to spill over in the next episode, but he says, at that time the disciples came to Jesus saying, "Who is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" This is a popular subject that they have.
Mm-hmm.
He says, then Jesus called a little child to him and set him in the midst of them and said, "Surely I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. Whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me." So I'm going to start sucking on a pacifier. Is that okay?
Right.
Is that what it's talking about here?
No. Yeah. It's the idea that, what does a child do? The child believes you.
Yeah.
If you tell a child something, they're going to believe that until they gain the knowledge, the age to be able to, the reasoning ability to see that thing is false. When things that I've seen throughout the years and interacting with people through my business previously, there are people that you would come into contact with that do things that you would never think of doing. The way that the lives are lived, things that are said. Well, just as another for instance, we were at a friend's house one time, a friend that Angela and I grew up with, going to school with, and in her particular neighborhood, the kids in the neighborhood would just blast in the door. You'd be sitting there talking, and the kids from all over the neighborhood would just come blasting in the door.
That's how I grew up.
Run in the kitchen and get into the neighbor's refrigerator, and I'm sitting there like having a seizure, like, what are they doing? Because that just didn't happen where I grew up, and so there's that. But there was nothing wrong with it in their. Perhaps there's nothing wrong with that, but in their mind, they had a completely different mindset than I did, and as children, we have, when we're children, we're malleable.
Yeah.
We're able to listen. We're able to take things at face value and not think into it. We don't have an agenda yet. We haven't been taught.
Yeah.
As I've quoted another preacher for many years in saying that you've got to have help to think that way.
Yeah.
And our children, it's just that, you know, a lot of the things that they learn in our world today, they have a lot of help.
I wrote this, and I don't know where I got this, what book I got this out of. It was in a Bible commentary, but when he says he said become as little children, and the commentator said that means moral innocence.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he's talking about.
Yeah, yeah.
He's not talking about that we should go ride around in a buggy and start sucking on pacifiers.
Right.
So that's kind of what he's talking about there. Do you think this has a dual meaning? That it also applies to how we deal with children, actual physical children?
Well, help me to think like you're thinking.
So you know, I mean, you know, we're supposed to take care of children and be kind to them, and all of those things. And I think there's that in the, even though that's not necessarily what he's getting across, but there's the overtone of that in there as well.
Mm-hmm.
That he says he calls a little child to him, and he says unless you converted and become as little children. So, and then he talks about receiving, whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Yeah, and you know, I suppose you could say out of that instance there that the child, I guess we can assume that the child came to him.
Yeah.
And didn't run away, and there were many adults running away.
Yeah.
At that time.
Yeah.
But there could also, I suppose, you could pull out of that a warning as to how you're to treat, you know, children.
Yeah.
And being those that lead them in the right direction, and to lead them towards Christ.
Yeah, and he talks about children being humble.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're supposed to be, you know, and that's I think as a, you know, and you know this as well as I do, is when you raise kids, and when you're around, you know, you watch kids develop, especially little kids. I mean, little kids are absolutely innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people teach this idea of original sin.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, Jesus wouldn't tell us to be like little kids if little kids were sinners, right?
Right. Yeah.
I don't know why nobody ever makes that point, but...
Right.
You know, we don't inherit the sins of our fathers or our grandfathers.
Yeah, we're told in the scriptures, the him that knows it is sin, it is sin.
Yeah.
And a little child doesn't have that understanding yet.
They don't have that understanding.
And, you know, you think of Adam and Eve, there wasn't any sin until they knew.
Until they knew. They did something they knew was wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ezekiel 18:20 says that the son shall not inherit the sins of the father.
Mm-hmm.
Which means that we deal with the consequence of Adam's sin, but we don't inherit his sin.
Right. Right.
He was kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and all of his children, which we are, have to deal with the fact that we don't live in God's garden anymore.
Right.
You know, we don't have access to the I don't want to say we do have access to the tree of life because that's Jesus, but we don't have that physical tree of life that they had access to.
Right.
We don't have access to it. So we'll go ahead and stop there, John.
All right. We'll pick up in chapter 18, verse 6 next time.
All right. It's been wonderful.
Yes, indeed, as always.
All right. Thank you.